Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepless Scientist, a quiet place in the cosmos where your thoughts can unwind and knowledge becomes a soft lullaby for the night. Tonight's journey will take us deep into the quiet aftermath of catastrophe, the moment when the world changed forever. We'll follow the soft footsteps of mammals, the whispering wings of birds, and the silent rise of primates. But before we explore the future they would come to shape, we must return to the night before everything ended, the last night of the age of dinosaurs. So, before you settle in and get cozy, I'd love if you could take a moment to like this video and subscribe, only if you truly find these quiet explorations enjoyable. And when you're ready, leave a comment to let me know where in the world you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. It's always such a joy to see all the places we gather from, each in our own little slice of time. Now feel free to dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for a soft background hum, and let's begin our journey into the slow unravelling of Earth's history. And if your mind starts to drift, that's perfectly fine. Let it. We'll still be here, gently telling the story. Imagine the world 66 million years ago. The sun is setting on a warm, late Cretaceous evening. The air hums with insects. Tropical forests stretch across much of the planet, thick with cycads and flowering plants. The scent of resin from ancient conifers drifts gently on the wind. Herds of great horned dinosaurs wander across floodplains. Feathered raptors perch in trees, watching the underbrush with eyes that glint in the fading light. Somewhere nearby, a group of tiny mammals, mouse-sized, quick-footed, cautious, huddle beneath the roots of a fallen log, nibbling on seeds and beetles. This world feels alive, balanced, even peaceful. But above the atmosphere, beyond the blue sky and the drifting clouds, something is hurtling toward Earth. Something fast, vast, and ancient. A chunk of rock, more than 10 kilometers across, speeding through space. It has no malice, no intention, but it will end nearly everything. They didn't know the dinosaurs. They couldn't have known. But the night would be their last. There was no warning siren, no shifting of the wind, no omen in the stars, just a sudden blinding light as the asteroid broke through the upper atmosphere, and then impact. The force was beyond comprehension. It struck near what is now the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico, at a place we now call Chicxulub. The Earth itself buckled. Shockwaves radiated out faster than sound. In the immediate area, everything was obliterated in an instant. Vaporized, burned, gone. And then came the rest. Firestorms ignited across entire continents as molten rock rained down from the sky. Trees caught fire. Animals, stunned and terrified, fled blindly. The air grew thick with ash. And still, it was only the beginning. The asteroid had struck an area rich in sulfur-bearing rocks. That sulfur was flung into the atmosphere, mixing with water vapour to create sulfuric acid rain. It fell in a deadly drizzle, burning leaves, acidifying lakes, and poisoning ecosystems. And then the skies darkened. For months, maybe even years, the Earth was shrouded in a sunless gloom. Particulate matter, soot, ash, aerosols, blocked the sun's light. Temperatures dropped sharply. Photosynthesis slowed, then stopped. Plants withered. Herbivores starved. And the predators who relied on them followed. It was not just a single event, but a sequence, a cascade. Shock, fire, rain, darkness, cold, hunger, each one weakening the resilience of life, cutting deeper. Nearly 3 out of every 4 species would vanish. The great marine reptiles disappeared. The pterosaurs who once ruled the skies were gone. And the non-avian dinosaurs, the great horned ceratopsians, the duck-billed hadrosaurs, the towering tyrannosaurs, all were lost, but not all life, not quite. As the giants fell, smaller creatures persisted. Some mammals, tiny and shivering, found refuge in underground burrows or dense thickets. They fed on insects, seeds and roots, whatever could still be found. They hibernated, They waited. They survived. And some birds, descendants of the very dinosaurs now fading from the earth, clung to life in isolated corners of the world. Their feathers kept them warm. Their beaks and behaviours helped them adapt. They too would carry something forward. When the darkness began to lift, when sunlight finally filtered through the ash-laden sky once more, it illuminated a quieter earth. The forests were charred. The seas had changed. And though the shapes of life had been thinned and altered, life itself had not ended. Something new would begin. A different world was on the horizon, and in its silence a new rhythm would slowly start to rise. So, as you lie back tonight, think of that final Cretaceous sunset, the stillness before the storm, the breath between eras, that moment suspended in time where an old world slipped away and a new one waited quietly beneath the ash. Imagine looking up at the sky, not knowing it was the last normal sunrise the Earth would ever see, 66 million years ago, in a moment that no eye could witness and no voice could describe. The sky above Earth broke open, not with lightning or storm, but with a silent, blinding descent. A rock larger than Mount Everest, travelling faster than sound, fell from space into the shallow waters of what is now the Yucatan Peninsula. The impact would take only seconds, but its consequences would echo through every forest, every ocean, and every tiny pocket of life. The asteroid struck with the force of over 1 billion nuclear bombs. That number is almost meaningless in its scale, and yet it was real. In the first moments, everything near the site, land, sea, creatures, even the air itself was turned into vapour. The shockwave alone flattened everything for hundreds of miles. Molten rock sprayed outward like a furious halo. The Earth, solid and ancient, rippled like water. All over the planet the consequences followed. Earthquakes shook the ground across continents. Wildfires ignited as red-hot debris rained down from the upper atmosphere, igniting trees, brush, and entire ecosystems. Ash and smoke filled the skies within hours. But that was only the beginning. What came next would stretch not for minutes or hours, but for years. The rock had struck not just the crust of the Earth, but a formation rich in sulfur-containing minerals. The heat of impact turned this sulfur into vapour, sending vast quantities of sulfuric particles into the upper atmosphere. These aerosols spread quickly, wrapping the globe in a hazy curtain that reflected sunlight back into space. Photosynthesis halted. Plants began to wither. Temperatures plunged. It wasn't just winter. It was a winter without seasons, without growth, without recovery. The oceans too suffered. Tsunamis from the impact rolled across entire basins, destroying shallow marine ecosystems. Marine plankton, the very base of the oceanic food chain, died off in droves as sunlight failed to penetrate the surface. Coral reefs collapsed. The creatures that fed on plankton and the creatures that fed on those began to starve. On land, it was no better. With plant life fading, the herbivores, those vast gentle giants that had once roamed in herds, lost their food source. Without them, the carnivores that hunted them followed. Tyrannosaurs, once masters of their ecosystems, found themselves rulers of a crumbling kingdom with nothing left to rule. The skies darkened further. Acid rain fell. Temperatures dipped. The world, once vibrant with colour and sound, faded into silence and ash. Some scientists call this period a global blackout. For months, perhaps years, sunlight was so scarce that even the midday sky glowed dim and red. It was more than an environmental catastrophe. It was a severing of continuity, a pause in Earth's story, as though the page had gone blank before the next chapter began. And yet, not everything ended. Deep in burrows, tiny mammals curled into themselves, drawing warmth from the earth and sustenance from whatever they could find: roots, insects, seeds. In dense patches of forest, birds huddled under leaves, their feathers providing crucial insulation. Some may have flown long distances, desperately seeking more hospitable pockets of land. Others stayed put, conserving energy, waiting, always waiting. The asteroid did not kill the dinosaurs directly. It created a world in which they, and many others, could no longer survive. It changed the climate too quickly, too violently. And for the large-bodied creatures at the top of food chains, that kind of change was a death sentence. Smaller life, however, found ways to slip between the cracks. Not out of cleverness or design, but through the quiet advantage of being overlooked. When food is scarce, being tiny means needing less. When the air grows cold, living underground or being able to hibernate becomes a superpower. When the world is chaos, simplicity is a shield. Still, the toll was staggering. By the time the atmosphere began to clear, nearly 75% of all species had vanished, on land, in the seas, in the skies. It was the 5th mass extinction in Earth's history, and it would take millions of years for biodiversity to recover. But it would recover, not in the same form, not with the same rulers, but life, as it so often does, would rewrite itself. The Earth didn't begin again with a roar. It began with a whisper, with insects crawling over charred ground, with roots pressing into the soil, reaching for moisture, with the rustle of feathers and the quiet heartbeat of a mammal waking from torpor. The age of dinosaurs was over. The age of mammals had not yet begun. For now, the planet was suspended between two epochs, its skies still dark, its ground still trembling. And so, as you lie there, listening to the quiet, let yourself imagine the Earth in that stillness. A planet not empty, but waiting. A long exhale after a violent breath. A pause before the rising of something new. After the blast, after the rain, after the months of darkness, the world was no longer what it had been. The forests were charred, the skies dim, and the ground cold beneath a fading sun. And in this new and hostile silence, one of the greatest lineages Earth had ever known came to an end. The non-avian dinosaurs had once ruled every corner of the land, from the towering sauropods of the southern continents to the agile theropods that stalked in shadows. They had dominated the Earth for over 150 million years. But now their world no longer existed. The planet had changed too fast, too completely, and in ways they could not adapt to quickly enough. They were not weak. They were not foolish. They were simply no longer built for what Earth had become. The extinction was not instant. Some may have survived for weeks, even months after the impact. A few small populations tucked away in less devastated regions may have lingered a little longer. But the dominoes were falling in every direction. Their world, finely tuned over millions of years, had been shattered, and as each piece of the food web collapsed, the survival of a large-bodied dinosaurs became impossible. It began, as it so often does, with the plants. The soot-darkened skies meant little sunlight reached the surface, and photosynthesis stalled across the globe. Without fresh growth, herbivorous dinosaurs, the massive hadrosaurs and ceratopsians, the long-necked sauropods, found themselves surrounded by plenty of vegetation, but none of it living. Hunger gnawed at them, slow and unrelenting. Their size, once an asset in defense and mobility, now became a liability. A large body needs a large meal, and the meals were vanishing, and with the plant-eaters weakening, the predators followed. Tyrannosaurs, dromaeosaurs, abelisaurids. They were apex hunters with strength and speed, but they were tethered to a food source that was slipping through the cracks. The largest carnivores were the first to fall. The smaller, more agile hunters may have lasted longer, but even they could not outrun the ecosystem's collapse. The rules of their survival had changed overnight, and they had been written out of the new script. Some species tried to adapt. There is evidence that certain small dinosaurs were already shifting toward bird-like forms, developing feathers not just for insulation but for gliding or display. Some may have begun changing their diets, experimenting with seeds or insects, but the pace of extinction was faster than the pace of evolution. For most, the changes came too late, but not for all. Among the ashes of their fallen kin, a few creatures survived. Not the giants of the plains, but the small feathered descendants of theropods, the early birds. They had lived alongside dinosaurs for tens of millions of years, their wings folded beneath trees, their nests tucked safely in foliage, their songs, if they had songs then, lost to time. What helped them endure? It may have been their size. Small bodies required fewer resources. It may have been their diet. Some birds could eat seeds, which could last long after plants died. It may have been their beaks, lighter and more versatile than toothy jaws. It may even have been the way they raised their young, quick, hidden, responsive to danger. Whatever the reason, the line that led to the birds of today did not break. It narrowed, it stumbled, but it held. The survival of birds is one of the most remarkable stories of persistence in natural history. When we look at a robin or a pigeon or a sparrow today, we're not looking at something new. We are looking at the last flickering thread of a once mighty tapestry. Birds are not after the dinosaurs. They are what remains of them. They are dinosaurs, still flying, still singing, still building nests in the bones of a broken world. Meanwhile, mammals had begun to stir in the shadows. Their story was just beginning, and it would take time to unfold. But they were not yet the dominant force. For now they were small, silent, and nearly invisible in the geological record. It's easy to imagine that extinction happens all at once, like a door slamming shut. But in reality, it's often a slow process. Species dwindle, lose territory, shrink in number, and vanish bit by bit. The last dinosaurs did not roar as they disappeared. They faded one by one. A nest never hatched. A herd never returned. A final call echoed in an empty valley and went unanswered. And in the quiet that followed, life did not stop. It paused. It waited. In this way, the extinction of the dinosaurs is not just a tale of loss. It is a hinge point in Earth's history, a moment when the old was swept away and the new was given space to grow. Without their disappearance, mammals may never have risen. Primates may never have evolved. We may never have existed at all. So tonight, as your thoughts begin to slow, think of those last days, not as an ending, but as a clearing of space. The earth breathes in cycles, and this was one of its deepest inhales. The exhale would come later, in forests and fields filled with new shapes, new sounds, and new futures. The world did not restart with noise or colour or grand declarations. It began again in silence, an eerie, persistent hush that wrapped itself around the earth like a blanket of ash. In the aftermath of destruction, the winds carried no birdsong, the trees bore no leaves, and the ground, once thundering under the weight of giants, held only charred roots and scattered bones. But within that silence, something strange and essential began to take shape. In the fossil record, scientists have found a clue to this quiet rebirth. It's called the fern spike, a sudden and dramatic rise in fern spores in the layers of rock deposited just after the impact. Ferns are pioneers. They are among the first plants to recolonize land after fire or flood. Their spores are light and travel easily. They grow where others cannot, thriving in poor soil and shaded places. The spike tells us that after the fires raged and the skies darkened, and the forests were reduced to ash and stumps, ferns came back first. They carpeted the wounded earth with green once more, but it was a different kind of green. Gone were the towering cycads, the thick coniferous groves, the dense interwoven canopies. The early post-impact world resembled a vast, open scrubland punctuated by low growth and opportunistic invaders. The ecosystems have been flattened, not just in structure, but in complexity. The webs of interdependent species so finely balanced before had snapped, leaving simple chains in their place. Insects began to reappear, drawn to the new plant life. Some would have emerged from buried cocoons, others blown in from distant, less devastated regions. With them came the first stirrings of pollination, the quiet exchanges of pollen and nectar that signal the return of mutualism. Two living things helping each other in order to survive. Small animals, too, began to venture above ground. Mammals, previously relegated to a twilight existence beneath the shadows of dinosaurs, now found themselves in a strange and empty world. The predators that once hunted them were gone. The towering herbivores that had trampled their tunnels and disturbed their nests were nothing more than memories etched in the soil. For the first time in millions of years, the mammals could move without always hiding. They were cautious, yes, but no longer cornered. And yet this new world was no paradise. It was still dim, still cold, and still marked by scarcity. Many of the creatures that survived, the impact would not survive the years that followed. The ecosystems were too fragile, the resources too limited. The extinction had not ended in a single blow. It was drawn out like a long and unkind winter, testing every organism's ability to endure. Birds, though fewer in number and variety than before, persisted as well. Their feathers helped them retain heat, and their ability to fly allowed them to scout wide areas for food. Many could eat seeds, which were among the few food sources that remained viable in the early aftermath. Nesting high in what few trees remained, or deep in sheltered crevices, they brought the gift of motion to a largely still world. And beneath the surface, life went on in miniature. Soil bacteria resumed their slow, unseen work. Fungi spread like quiet networks beneath the earth, breaking down the dead and returning nutrients to the soil. Tiny vertebrates, cold-blooded and ancient, scuttled through leaf litter in places where the sun had begun, tentatively to shine again. It was not a grand reawakening. It was a slow thawing of life's pulse. One of the quiet survivors from this time was a creature called Purgatorius. It was small, perhaps only the size of a mouse, with a long tail and sharp little teeth. It lived in the trees or among the underbrush, feeding on insects and possibly fruits or seeds. Fossils suggest that Purgatorius appeared very soon after the impact, maybe even within a few 100,000 years. It's thought to be one of the earliest ancestors of primates. That is to say, it may be one of your ancestors. Not directly, of course. But it stood near the base of the tree that would one day produce monkeys, apes, and eventually humans. In a way, Purgatorius was like a whisper in the dark, a tiny, inconspicuous creature stepping out into a world that was just beginning to recover. And in doing so, it carried forward the spark of a story that had nearly ended. As life began to re-establish itself, the Earth's systems also began to stabilize. The sulfur haze gradually thinned, the skies brightened, sunlight returned to the soil. With each passing season, more plants took root, more insects emerged, and more animals began to explore the open spaces. In time, these small re-beginnings would give rise to vast new ecosystems, forests filled with flowering plants, plains teeming with grazers, skies alive with birdsong. But none of that had happened yet. For now it was still quiet. Perhaps the most extraordinary thing about this moment in Earth's history is not how much was lost, but how much was able to return. The biosphere had been devastated, but it had not been extinguished. Life found the cracks, the shadows, the unnoticed places, and it waited there. It crept back not with dominance but with humility. It asked nothing of the world but the chance to try again. And so, as you drift off, let yourself imagine that hush, the sound of ferns uncurling through ash, the faint rustle of wings in a broken forest, the patter of tiny feet over cooling stone. This was not the end of life on Earth. It was simply a moment when life stopped to catch its breath. After the sky fell and the fire faded, The earth was left not with silence, but with whispers. In the ashes of a broken world, life had not vanished. It had simply hidden, curled tightly into the smallest of forms, waiting for the worst to pass. Survival, in those years after the impact, was not about strength or speed or size. It was about something quieter, adaptability, resilience, and the ability to disappear when the world demanded it. The mammals that lived through the end of the Cretaceous were not mighty hunters or proud ancestors with banners and horns. They were, for the most part, small, furry, shivering things. Most weighed less than a pound. Many were nocturnal, emerging only under the cover of darkness. Their diets were humble: grubs, roots, seeds, the occasional fallen fruit. But that simplicity became their salvation. While the grand creatures of the Mesozoic starved in the empty light, these small mammals could find just enough to survive. One of their greatest assets was warmth. Unlike reptiles, which relied on external temperatures to stay active, mammals could generate their own heat. Fur, often seen as an evolutionary luxury, became a vital tool in the cold post-impact winters. And in their burrows, insulated from the chaos above, many of these creatures slept. Some entered states of torpor, slowing their metabolism to survive on little or nothing. Others huddled together, sharing warmth and waiting out the worst. Size mattered too, but in a way that defied the logic of the dinosaur age. A large body meant strength, defense, power. But it also meant a greater need for food, more exposure to the elements, and fewer hiding places. The mammals that survived were small enough to slip through cracks, literal and metaphorical. They didn't need much, and the earth didn't have much to give. Birds, too, had their tools for survival. These descendants of the dinosaurs had already been adapting for millions of years, evolving feathers not just for flight, but for insulation and communication. In the cold, dark aftermath of the asteroid, those feathers made all the difference. They trapped body heat, allowed for mobility, and offered protection from the elements. But feathers alone weren't enough. The birds that survived were those who could adapt to a world in scarcity. Many modern birds, especially ground-dwelling species like ducks and chickens, likely share traits with these survivors. Seed-eating species in particular had an edge. Seeds can survive in the soil long after plants have died, tucked safely beneath layers of ash. Birds with beaks designed to crack and consume them had access to food when others did not. Their ability to fly also offered crucial advantages. Birds could move across damaged landscapes, scouting for new shelter or food sources. They could avoid localized dangers, and though many species perished, those who remained carried forward a design that had proved remarkably resilient. Insects, often overlooked, were another pillar of survival. Though many species likely died out, others thrived in the gaps. Detritivores, organisms that feed on dead material, found no shortage of nourishment. As the great bodies of dinosaurs decomposed and the forests crumbled, these creatures cleaned the slate. And for mammals and birds alike, insects were a critical food source in an otherwise barren world. Even the shape of a jaw could matter. Mammals with generalized dentition, teeth that could grind a variety of foods, had an advantage over specialists. In a world where meals were unpredictable, being a dietary opportunist was a superpower. Sharp teeth could tear, flat molars could grind, and flexible mouths could adapt as needed. Then there were the underground engineers, creatures that burrowed, built, and barricaded themselves from the storm. These included not only mammals, but certain amphibians and reptiles. Tunnels offered insulation, protection from predators, and steady temperatures. The soil, still warm from the Earth's core, buffered them against the cold chaos above. Hibernators had another edge. Animals that could enter extended dormancy could essentially sleep through the worst years. By dramatically slowing their heart rate and metabolism, they survived on stored fat or minimal food. It was not an active life, but it was a preserved one. In evolutionary terms, rest became a strategy. Not every trait was biological. Some of survival came down to geography. Species isolated in certain pockets of the world, far from the worst of the impact fallout, may have had better chances. Regions with fewer fires, less ash, or slower climate shift served as refuges. Life clung to them like moss on a shaded stone. In time, new rules would emerge. But in those early days, survival was defined by traits that had once seemed minor. Smallness, simplicity, silence. Traits that had once meant living in the margins now meant holding the thread of life itself. So tonight, if you're feeling small, or quiet, or out of place, remember this. The creatures who shaped the future were not those who roared loudest or stood tallest. They were those who endured, who waited, who adapted in silence. You are the descendant of survivors, not the mighty, but the clever, not the kings of the old world, but the caretakers of the new one. In the years and millennia that followed the asteroid impact, the world was reshaped not by giants, but by the persistence of the small. The Paleocene epoch, spanning from about 66 to 56 million years ago, unfolded like the slow recovery of a patient after trauma. The air grew clearer, the sunlight more dependable, the soil richer with each passing century. But the echoes of the catastrophe lingered, not just in the geology, but in the quiet way life returned. The earth was no longer ruled by thunderous footsteps. It belonged now to feet that padded softly, claws that curled around branches, and eyes that watched carefully in the dim green light. The mammals that had survived the extinction began to emerge into the open. They were not in a hurry. Evolution, even at its most responsive, works with patience. The earliest Paleocene mammals were still small by modern standards, many no larger than rats or squirrels. But their world had changed. There were no more towering predators above them, no vast herbivores to flatten the undergrowth, no pterosaurs to snatch them from the canopy. For the first time in their history, mammals could climb higher, run farther, and explore during the day. In this more forgiving landscape, nature began experimenting. Evolution played, slowly and cautiously, with new shapes and behaviours. Some mammals stayed low to the ground, perfecting their digging limbs and developing stronger jaws for cracking nuts or catching insects. Others began to climb, discovering the advantages of living in the trees, safety, food, and freedom of movement. It's in these forests of the Paleocene that we meet a remarkable creature, Purgatorius. Not particularly famous outside of paleontology, Purgatorius may have been one of the earliest proto-primates, an ancestor not just of monkeys and apes, but of you and everyone you've ever known. It was a tiny thing, likely no bigger than your hand, with grasping feet and a long tail. It probably lived in the trees, foraging for insects, fruits and seeds. Its fossilized teeth, small but surprisingly complex, hinted a diet that required flexibility. Sharp enough to pierce, flat enough to grind. This versatility would prove vital in the ever-shifting Paleocene environment. And it wasn't just about food. Those tiny hands with flexible digits and curved claws allowed Purgatorius to move in three-dimensional space, to leap, to hang, to reach. Life in the trees required more than strength. It required balance, depth perception, and a brain capable of coordinating it all. And so, little by little, the groundwork was laid. The skills that would one day allow humans to build cities and write poetry began here, with a small creature clambering through a canopy of recovering trees, searching for something to eat. Elsewhere on the forest floor and in the open spaces beyond, other mammals were finding their own paths. Some evolved into gliders, stretching skin between their limbs to leap between trees like silent paper planes. Others became better runners, elongating their legs and developing more efficient gaits. A few took to water, beginning the long evolutionary journey that would one day produce seals, whales and otters. But all of them shared a world that was still healing. The Earth was not yet as lush or stable as it would become in later epochs. The forests were patchy, the seasons unpredictable. Predators were beginning to return, some birds of prey, some early carnivorous mammals, but the balance of power had shifted. Life was no longer dominated by size. Instead, it was shaped by adaptability, cleverness, and an ability to adjust to sudden changes. Food chains were shorter, but more flexible. Insects remained crucial, not only as decomposers, but as a food source for nearly every small vertebrate. Fruits and seeds, now produced by the expanding population of flowering plants, offered new energy-rich diets. Mammals that could climb and remember where fruiting trees were located had an edge. Brains grew larger, memories became more useful. Intelligence, though still simple by modern standards, began to show its value. It was also during the Paleocene that behaviours began to change. Social interactions grew more complex. Some mammals started to live in groups, caring for their young over longer periods, cooperating for protection or food. A longer childhood allowed more time for learning, and learning allowed for more nuanced interaction with the environment. Birds, too, continued to diversify. Many remained small and ground-dwelling, but others took to the trees. Songbirds began to emerge. Flightless birds developed in isolated regions. Evolution branched in all directions like cracks spreading from a single point of pressure, creating 1,000 new possibilities where once there had only been a few. All of this took time, 1,000,000 years here, a few more there. But time was something the survivors had, and the world no longer rushed. With each generation, new forms appeared, some fragile, some fleeting, but some enduring, laying the foundation for the next stage of life on Earth. It's humbling to think that from such humble beginnings, the future was being written, that in the canopy of a forest long turned to stone, a small creature with nimble fingers and curious eyes was already testing the boundaries of what was possible, that in the quiet places where no roar remained, life was not just surviving, it was preparing. So, as you breathe gently and settle deeper into stillness, remember this: greatness often begins in whispers. The loudest histories are built on moments so soft they leave no sound. And in the Paleocene twilight, the small and the quiet had inherited the earth. In the hush that followed extinction, as birds whispered through quiet canopies and mammals skittered in cautious paths across the forest floor, the planet itself was undergoing another kind of transformation, one that moved with even greater patience than any animal's step. While species clawed their way back into existence, the green world, the realm of leaves and stems, roots and spores, was slowly stitching the biosphere together again. It began, as it often does, with the pioneers. Ferns, mosses and liverworts were the first to blanket the scorched earth. We've already met the fern spike, that strange flourish of fern spores in the fossil, recorded just after the asteroid's impact. They're the emergency responders of the plant kingdom, sweeping in when fires fade and soil lies bare. These ancient plants required little to thrive. No flowers, no pollinators, no elaborate reproductive strategies, just moisture, shade and time. And for a while they were enough. But the return of flowering plants, angiosperms, would truly reshape the world. Before the mass extinction, these plants had been gaining ground throughout the Cretaceous, already competing with cycads and conifers in many regions. But after the collapse they flourished. Their seeds, buried beneath layers of ash and protected in hardened shells, had survived the long dark. And as sunlight slowly returned and the climate began to warm, those seeds cracked open once more. Angiosperms offered something new to the recovering ecosystems: variety, adaptability and complexity. Unlike the earlier gymnosperms, flowering plants had evolved an alliance with the animal kingdom. Their colours and scents were invitations, their fruits, small packages of sugar-wrapped energy were bribes. Eat this and scatter my seeds, drink this nectar and carry my pollen. These relationships, interrupted by the extinction, began again almost as soon as both sides were able. With the return of the plants came the return of the pollinators. Insects such as bees, beetles, and butterflies found their way back into the recovering forests and meadows, their bodies once again coated in yellow dust as they moved from bloom to bloom. The relationship between flowering plants and their pollinators is one of nature's most elegant contracts, written in sweetness and fulfilled in movement, and it helped accelerate the rebuilding of life. As forests expanded, so did the vertical world, the layered living tower of roots, trunks, branches, and leaves. Each level hosted its own microhabitat, its own rules and residents. The forest floor teemed with decomposers and foragers. Mid-canopy branches became home to climbing mammals and hidden nests. The upper layers, kissed by sunlight, were filled with birds, insects, and the earliest gliders. Light returned not just to the land, but to the structure of life itself. The emergence and eventual dominance of grasses, though not until the later Paleogene, also signalled a turning point. Grasses are resilient. They thrive in open spaces, regenerate quickly after being grazed or burned, and spread through both seeds and underground rhizomes. Their rise would eventually give birth to vast grasslands, savannas, and prairies, ecosystems entirely different from the closed canopy forests that had ruled much of the Mesozoic. With grasses came grazers. Though still in the future at this point in the Paleocene, the foundation was being laid. Some mammals, sensing the changing menu of Earth's vegetation, began evolving teeth suited for grinding. Jaw muscles shifted, gut bacteria adapted. The body followed the diet step by step, generation by generation. Even as the surface world greened, the invisible networks beneath the soil grew as well. Fungi, often forgotten in the spotlight of biological storytelling, played a crucial role in the rebirth of ecosystems. Mycorrhizal fungi in particular formed symbiotic partnerships with plant roots, exchanging nutrients and helping plants absorb water and minerals more efficiently. Beneath the leaf litter and mossy stones, a vast fungal web was quietly reconnecting the planet. Birds, ever adaptable, were among the earliest to benefit from the recovering plant life. Some species nested in branches, others foraged for berries and seeds. Their droppings helped disperse plant seeds, furthering the reach of the forest. In this way, plants and birds rebuilt the world together, each helping the other find new ground, new air, new possibilities. Mammals too adapted to the green resurgence. Frugivores, fruit-eating species, became more common, especially among those beginning to spend more time in the trees. With fruit came colour vision, an evolutionary advantage that allowed primates and other mammals to distinguish ripe from unripe, edible from dangerous. The ability to see not just the shapes of the forest but its subtle hues marked another small step in cognition and complexity. The Paleocene landscape may have lacked the grandeur of the age before. There were no thunderous herds, no armoured beasts, no creatures casting mile-long shadows. But in its quiet renewal, it carried the seeds of a world more diverse, more interconnected, and ultimately more resilient than what had come before. And as we look out across this green world, this slowly reawakening Earth, we begin to see the outlines of what is to come. Grasses that will support herds, flowers that will inspire flight, trees that will one day hold primates and eventually us. There is something deeply reassuring in this image, that no matter how scorched or darkened the ground may be, life has its way of returning. It may not come with force, it may not arrive on schedule, but it comes, not all at once, and not without loss, but with patience, persistence, and growth. So, as you close your eyes tonight, let your mind drift across a field of fern and flower, beneath a sky still soft with ash. The green is returning, and with it, the story continues. In the vast stillness after the dinosaurs had gone, Earth did not immediately feel alive with new beginnings. It was not a sudden explosion of forms, but rather a slow and cautious emergence, a testing of waters, a stretching of limbs, a quiet reshaping of possibilities. And into this silence stepped the mammals. For tens of millions of years, mammals had remained mostly in the background. While dinosaurs roared and ruled above, these small creatures had huddled beneath, scurried in the shadows, climbed discreetly, and rarely dared to grow large. They had survived not by power, but by staying, small, flexible, and largely unseen. But now, for the first time in their evolutionary story, the ceiling had been lifted. The canopy was no longer crowded with giants. The plains no longer trembled beneath the footsteps of titans. The niches, those invisible ecological roles that shape every living system, were empty, and nature, as it always does, began to fill them. This was not the sudden rise of dominance. It was more like a cautious exploration. Imagine a child stepping into a long-abandoned playground, slowly rediscovering what it feels like to swing, to climb, to jump. The early mammals were much the same. They began to try on new shapes, new behaviours, new diets, and the earth, still raw but recovering, gave them room to try. Some mammals stayed small, perfecting the skills that had helped them survive. These were the burrowers, creatures who made their homes underground, where the temperature was stable and danger was far above. They evolved stronger limbs for digging, sensitive whiskers to navigate tunnels, and teeth capable of gnawing through roots and hard soil. These animals weren't glamorous, but they were essential. They turned the soil, aerated the earth, and helped recycle nutrients, quiet architects of the underground. Others took to the trees. With fewer predators in the canopy and a growing abundance of fruit and leaves, the forest became an invitation. Early climbers developed grasping limbs and prehensile tails. Some eventually stretched skin between their limbs, gliding from branch to branch in the dim forest light. It was not true flight, but it was close, an elegant solution to a three-dimensional world. These gliders would become the ancestors of today's flying squirrels and colugos, drifting silently over the heads of ground-bound competitors. Some mammals tested the waters, literally. Along rivers and lakes, creatures with strong legs and paddle-like tails began to wade and swim, feeding on fish, insects, and aquatic plants. Though it would be many millions of years before whales and seals emerged, the first experiments in aquatic life had already begun. The flexibility of mammalian form allowed these creatures to shape themselves to whatever environment offered opportunity. And of course, some began to run. With the forest thinning in places and open terrain expanding, speed became a valuable tool. Long limbs, lean bodies, and efficient muscles allowed these runners to travel farther and faster. Their bones grew lighter, their joints more specialized. Whether chasing or fleeing, these mammals learned to use distance and velocity to their advantage. Each movement became not just an escape, but a potential story of adaptation. Diet, too, became a playground of possibilities. The earliest mammals were primarily insectivores, eaters of beetles, ants, and grubs. But in the absence of dinosaur competition, many began to branch out. Some turned to seeds and fruit, others to leaves. A few grew bolder and started hunting smaller animals, and with each dietary shift came changes in teeth, in jaws, in digestive systems. Teeth are among the most informative fossils we have. They tell us not just what animals ate, but how they lived. Grinding molars signal a plant-based diet. Sharp canines tell of carnivorous habits. Mixed patterns hint at omnivory, a strategy of flexibility well suited to uncertain times. Evolution, freed from the constraints of ancient rulers, began to play. Some mammals developed armoured backs like the early relatives of armadillos. Others grew long snouts for sniffing out prey beneath the ground. Some adopted spines, others thick fur. A few began living communally, developing early forms of social behaviour that would one day support complex communication and cooperation. But none of this happened quickly. It unfolded over millions of years, through countless generations. Tiny changes, barely noticeable at first, built upon each other like threads in a tapestry. A slightly longer limb, a slightly sharper tooth, a behaviour passed down through repetition, a moment of survival that became, in time, a lineage. This is the quiet miracle of evolution. It doesn't always roar. Often it hums, it whispers in the bones, it bends without breaking, it waits, and in waiting it reshapes the world. And so, as you lie still beneath your blanket, imagine that ancient earth, open, quiet, and slowly being repopulated by creatures who were once timid, now exploring with cautious wonder. Each footstep a first, each leap a gamble, each new form a question to the universe. Can this survive? And often the answer was yes. As mammals spread into the open niches of a post-dinosaur world, another quieter shift was unfolding, one that would shape the future paths of entire continents. It was not a single event, but a slow divergence in how mammals approached one of the most fundamental aspects of life: reproduction. This divergence, subtle at first, would eventually separate the mammalian lineage into two great branches, marsupials and placentals, and over time their differing strategies would interact with a drifting planet to create wildly different ecosystems, filled with stories of isolation, adaptation, and persistence. At its core, the split between marsupials and placental mammals is about timing. Both groups give birth to live young, but they handle the process in very different ways. Marsupials give birth early, often when the embryo is still tiny and underdeveloped. The newborn, sometimes no larger than a grain of rice, must crawl from the birth canal into a protective pouch, where it latches onto a nipple and continues to grow. Placentals, on the other hand, develop their young internally for much longer. A complex placenta allows nutrients and oxygen to pass from mother to baby, resulting in offspring that are far more developed at birth, able to see, walk, or even run shortly after entering the world. Each strategy comes with trade-offs. Marsupial reproduction, while seemingly risky, allows for shorter gestation periods and rapid birth intervals. If conditions turn unfavourable, the mother has invested less in each individual young. If a joey is lost, another can be conceived quickly. Placental reproduction, by contrast, is a deeper investment. A longer pregnancy demands more resources and energy, but it results in stronger, more self-sufficient offspring. In the early days of mammalian evolution, both types coexisted in many parts of the world. But as the continents slowly drifted apart, carried on tectonic plates like massive rafts, they began to shape the fate of the creatures they carried. Around this time, the supercontinent of Gondwana had already begun to fragment, sending Australia and South America drifting into isolation. And in that isolation, the marsupials began to thrive. Australia, in particular, became a marsupial sanctuary. With no placental competitors arriving to challenge them, marsupials diversified into every possible form. Some grazed on grass, others climbed trees. Some developed powerful legs for leaping across vast plains. A few even became carnivores, like the now extinct thylacine, also known as the Tasmanian tiger. The continent became a grand evolutionary experiment, proof that marsupials could take on nearly every role that placentals filled elsewhere. South America, too, nurtured its own marsupial lineage, but it was not quite as isolated. Over time, when land bridges formed, waves of placental mammals arrived from the north and outcompeted many of the native species. Only the opossum and a few others remain today as echoes of South America's marsupial past. Meanwhile, in the northern hemisphere, placental mammals were rising. They filled the forests and plains with growing diversity, and among them, a few key groups began to shape the future in distinct ways. Rodents were one of these groups. Small, fast reproducing, and incredibly adaptable, they evolved specialized teeth, incisors that never stopped growing, perfectly suited for gnawing. rodents became generalists, capable of living in almost any environment and feeding on a wide variety of foods. Their success was rooted not in dominance, but in numbers, speed, and resilience. Even today, they remain the most numerous and widespread group of mammals on the planet. Another key development was the rise of hoofed mammals, ungulates. These early grazers and browsers began to appear in different forms, some with odd numbers of toes, perissodactyls like horses and rhinos, and others with even artiodactyls like deer and cattle. Their limbs grew longer and more efficient, their teeth specialised for grinding plant matter. The open landscapes that had once belonged to dinosaurs now welcomed herds of hoofed mammals, moving slowly across grassy hills and river valleys. But as herbivores grew more specialised, so too did their predators. Among the early, carnivorous placentals were creatures called creodonts, a now extinct group of mammalian hunters that ruled the Paleocene and Eocene epochs. They were not the direct ancestors of modern carnivores, but they filled similar roles: stalking, chasing, ambushing. With strong jaws and sharp teeth, creodonts shaped the behaviour and body plans of the prey animals around them. Another strange group to emerge was the mesonychids, hoofed predators, oddly enough. These wolf-sized mammals walked on digits tipped with blunt hooves and had large carnivorous teeth. Their fossils suggest they were powerful and efficient, possibly scavengers, possibly hunters. Though they too would eventually disappear, some researchers believe they may have been closely related to the ancestors of whales, an idea we'll revisit later. As continents continued to drift, climates fluctuated, and ecosystems reshaped themselves, the diversity of mammals blossomed. But through it all, the story was not one of conquest. It was one of divergence, of different approaches to life, shaped by environment, geography, and ancient chance. The marsupials and placentals each found their moment, their landscapes, and their stories. And so tonight, as your thoughts begin to quiet, consider the branching paths that life takes. There is no single way to succeed, no perfect strategy. There are only responses to warmth, to hunger, to distance, to time. Life adapts, it splits, it meanders, and in its meandering it creates the world we know. With the quiet world now filling once again with leaves, fur, feather and song, something remarkable began to happen. Slowly, cautiously, and then with increasing confidence, some mammals began to grow, not just in number, but in size. The absence of the great dinosaurs had not only opened space in the ecosystem, it had removed the ceiling that had once pressed down on every other animal. Without titanic herbivores to block the sunlight or dominate the food sources, mammals were free to experiment with scale. And once the experiment began, it led to an astonishing rise in body size, across landscapes, across continents, and across time. It started small, as it always does. The first mammals to reach sizes larger than a domestic cat were still dwarfed by their prehistoric predecessors. But as plant life returned and diversified, as forests thickened and grasslands unfurled like green oceans, the opportunity to grow became more than a possibility. It became an advantage. Larger animals could reach higher foliage, travel farther for food, and defend themselves more effectively against predators. And in the absence of the giant carnivores that had once patrolled the earth, there was simply more room, physically and ecologically, for bigger bodies to evolve. Among the earliest large herbivores were the ungulates, hoofed mammals whose descendants would one day include deer, cattle, horses, elephants, and giraffes. In the Paleocene and early Eocene epochs, their ancestors were often small and rather generalised in form, lacking the dramatic horns or tusks we might associate with modern examples. But they were fast learners, evolutionarily speaking. Their teeth began to shift, flattening into grinding surfaces for chewing fibrous plants. Their legs lengthened and their postures changed, and in some lineages their bodies swelled to sizes not seen since the age of dinosaurs. Brontotheras were among the most impressive of these new giants. Also known as thunder beasts, they roamed the Eocene plains like prehistoric rhinoceroses, some growing to nearly 3 meters at the shoulder. With Y-shaped horns and thick limbs, they looked every bit like Earth's new titans, though they were entirely unrelated to the dinosaurs that had come before them. Their massive bulk made them more difficult to hunt, while their sheer appetite reshaped the vegetation they walked through. Just by existing, they were engineering the landscape, and as herbivores grew, predators had to keep pace. The evolutionary arms race resumed, quietly, as always, beneath the canopy and across the savannah. Among the earliest large carnivores were the creodonts, a now extinct group that once dominated ecosystems around the world. These were not the ancestors of today's wolves, lions, or bears, but they filled similar roles. Some were long-bodied and low-slung, chasing prey in bursts of speed. Others were stocky and powerful, built for ambush and crushing force. With strong jaws, long teeth, and keen senses, they were the silent balance to the new giants, reminders that no form of dominance goes unchallenged for long. Then there were the mesonychids, a peculiar group of hoofed carnivores. Yes, hoofed. These odd creatures resembled wolves in body shape but walked on digits tipped with hooves instead of claws. Their teeth, however, were unmistakably those of a predator, sharp, serrated, and built for tearing meat. Some scientists believe they were scavengers, others suspect they hunted in packs. There is even evidence that some may have taken to the water, foraging along shorelines and swimming between riverbanks. From these strange in-between animals would eventually emerge a lineage that would astonish the world, the whales. But the rise of giants was not limited to brute strength or fast limbs. In the absence of overwhelming predation, large size offered other benefits. Larger animals could store more fat and water, allowing them to survive in harsher climates. Their sheer bulk provided thermal stability in cooler environments. Their long legs could carry them across mountains, deserts, or frozen plains. They could shape migration routes, influence plant growth, and even alter weather patterns through the redistribution of nutrients. And yet, for all their size, these animals remained quiet in their transformations. There were no drums in the distance, no banners raised. Their evolution was written not in declarations, but in bones, fossilized joints, dental wear, footprints hardened in mud. Over time, the world filled with heavy footfalls and the soft rustle of tall grasses parting for broad shoulders. This expansion in size, this gentle swelling of the mammalian body plan, marked a new phase in Earth's history. It was not the return of the past, but the creation of something new. These were not simply replacement dinosaurs. They were part of a different logic, warm-blooded, furred, and often social. Their lives were shaped not just by instinct, but by memory, cooperation, and the slow unfolding of complex behavior. And through it all, the ecosystems balanced themselves. Where there were grazers, there were browsers. Where there were fleet-footed herders, there were ambush predators hiding in the brush. The web was being rewoven, strand by strand, by creatures with new tools, new forms, and new stories. So, as you drift gently now toward rest, imagine a planet slowly filling with motion again. Not chaotic, not sudden, but steady and grand. Picture a herd of Brontotheras moving across the horizon, their shadows stretching across an ancient plain. Hear the padded steps of early predators trailing behind, and above them all the sky wide and quiet, like the world holding its breath in wonder. High in the canopy of ancient forests, where the light filtered softly through tangled leaves, and the air was filled with the sound of distant wings and rustling branches, a new kind of creature was quietly learning how to live in 3 dimensions. These were not the loudest animals, nor the largest. They didn't thunder across the plains or swim across ancient seas. But they were beginning to see the world in a new way. Closer, clearer, more detailed. And in doing so, they began a journey that would eventually reach all the way to us. Life in the trees required skills that ground-dwelling mammals had never needed. In a forest, survival depended on more than speed or strength. It depended on balance, grip, coordination, and depth perception. A mistimed leap, a misjudged branch, a slip of the hand, or paw, and the fall could be fatal. So evolution began to adjust. Over time, some small mammals developed hands better suited for grasping. Their fingers grew longer and more flexible. Claws were replaced by nails, allowing for better surface contact and precision. These hands weren't just good for holding branches. They were beginning to explore, to manipulate, to learn. At the same time, their eyes began to shift. In many early mammals, the eyes were positioned on the sides of the head, ideal for scanning wide areas and spotting predators. But in the branches, that kind of vision wasn't enough. To leap from one tree to another, you needed to judge distance accurately. You needed depth perception. And for that, you needed eyes that faced forward, with overlapping fields of view. Slowly, gently, the faces of these creatures changed. They began to look ahead, literally and in a sense, evolutionarily. These changes didn't happen all at once. They unfolded across millennia, in species whose names most people have never heard. Small, squirrel-like creatures such as Plesiadapis and its relatives, the Plesiadapiforms. These animals lived during the Paleocene and early Eocene epochs, roughly 60 to 55 million years ago. Their fossils show a mixture of traits, some rodent-like, others surprisingly primate. They may not have been true primates as we define them today, but they were close, perhaps cousins, perhaps early steps on the same long path. What they tell us is that the forest was shaping more than bodies, it was shaping minds. Navigating the canopy isn't just a physical challenge, it requires memory. You need to remember where the fruit ripens, where the safest paths are, which branches sway under your weight, and which ones hold firm. And so, brains began to grow, not just in size but in function. These early arboreal mammals weren't just reacting, they were beginning to anticipate. And in a world of predators, some still on the ground, others like ancient raptors overhead, being able to move quickly, quietly, and intelligently became the difference between surviving and becoming someone else's meal. Night vision may also have played a role. Many early primates were likely nocturnal, their large eyes helping them see in dim light. The moonlit forest was their home, their classroom, their stage. Grasping hands, forward-facing eyes, enhanced memory, and spatial awareness. These are the foundations of the primate lineage. Not tools or language or fire, just the simple, vital ability to hold on and look around and learn. And from there, another shift began. Sociality. Life in the trees could be solitary, but for many early primates, living in groups offered advantages. More eyes to watch for danger, more individuals to share information about food sources, more interaction, which led to more complexity. Who can be trusted? Who's in charge? Who gets to mate, and when? These were the earliest stirrings of social behaviour, of cooperation, of hierarchy, of bonds that went beyond biology. It's easy to overlook how revolutionary that was. Most animals live by instinct, reacting to stimuli with relatively simple responses. But social mammals had to remember not just where things were, but who other individuals were. They had to recall past interactions, navigate subtle cues, and sometimes even deceive or empathise. The forest was teaching more than how to move, it was teaching how to relate. And with that, something else began to stir. Play. Play is more than fun, it's practice. Young primates who wrestled, chased, mimicked and tumbled were learning essential skills in a safe environment. They were testing the limits of their bodies, their minds, their relationships. And so, generation by generation, these quiet tree dwellers became more than just mammals with big, eyes and clever hands. They became something new, something curious, something with the early glimmers of thought. As you rest tonight, let your mind wander to those ancient forests. Picture a small creature perched on a mossy limb, its fingers wrapped around the bark, its eyes wide in the twilight. Around it, the world is alive with gentle motion, the sway of leaves, the flicker of insects, the distant call of something unknown. It doesn't know where its story will lead. It only knows that it's holding on, looking forward and beginning to see. Somewhere in a warm forest about 55 million years ago, a creature paused on a branch, just for a moment. Its fingers curled around the bark with ease, its eyes scanned the shadows for flickers of movement, and its nose twitched, not to track a scent, but to confirm what its eyes already suggested. That brief stillness, the act of stopping to observe, to process, to decide, marked a growing shift in the animal kingdom. For this was no longer just a creature reacting to its environment, it was beginning to reflect. This period in Earth's history, spanning the late Paleocene to the early Eocene and beyond, saw the emergence of true primates, not just relatives with hints of primate-like traits, but creatures whose skulls, hands, teeth and brains placed them unmistakably on the branch of the evolutionary tree that would eventually bear monkeys, apes and humans. Among the earliest of these is a fossil named Alteatlesius kulci, discovered in the Atlas Mountains of Morocco. Dated to nearly 56 million years ago, this tiny creature may have been one of the very first primates, or at least very close to the base of that lineage. Its molars hint at a diet of fruit and insects. Its body was likely agile, built for climbing. And while the remains are fragmentary, they offer a glimpse of a moment when the primate form was just beginning to settle into something more recognizable. Over time, the evolutionary record grows richer, especially in regions like Africa and Asia. Fossils show increasing refinement in the traits that would define primates. Eyes that were not only forward-facing, but increasingly large, adapted for vision that extended into dusk and dawn. Limbs with greater mobility and strength. Fingers that could grasp not just branches but objects, seeds, fruit, insects, and eventually tools. The forests themselves were becoming more complex. As flowering plants spread and diversified, the ecosystems became denser, layered, and filled with hidden pathways. In such an environment, intelligence became a survival strategy. Remembering which trees bore fruit and when, which paths led safely home, and who in the group could be trusted, these were no longer luxuries. They were necessities. By the time we reached the fossil Egyptopithecus zeuxis, the primate lineage had taken another significant step forward. This species lived around 30 million years ago in what is now Egypt, and it represents a transitional form between earlier primates and the ancestors of modern monkeys and apes. Roughly the size of a house cat, Egyptopithecus had a small but clearly enlarged brain relative to its body size, and features suggesting it spent much of its time in trees. Its teeth tell us it was an omnivore, comfortable with fruit, leaves, and possibly small insects. Its limbs suggest climbing was still important, but perhaps with some limited leaping or upright posture. Most notably, it appears to have lived in social groups, an inference drawn from the size of its eyes and brain, as well as the parallels we see in modern primates. Social living, though complex, offers many evolutionary advantages. In a group, one individual can stand watch while others feed. Young can be protected by more than just their mothers. Knowledge of safe food, of danger, of roots and rhythms can be shared and retained. And once primates began living together in coordinated units, evolution began selecting for individuals who could communicate, empathize, and even manipulate one another. The development of opposable thumbs played a key role in this emerging sophistication. To manipulate the world, to pick up small objects with precision, to hold and explore with curiosity. These were not just physical advantages, but cognitive ones. With better hands came better brains, and with better brains came more advanced behaviour. In this time, we also begin to see the roots of something deeper: emotion, memory, even the foundations of morality. Modern primates display a wide range of social behaviours: grooming to maintain bonds, play to explore boundaries, mourning the loss of group members. It's likely that many of these behaviours had early analogues in their ancestors. As the primate brain expanded, childhoods grew longer. Infants required more care, more learning time. This extended dependency created opportunities, not just for learning how to survive, but how to belong. Social knowledge passed from parent to offspring, from sibling to sibling. Over time, these interactions shaped brains that were not just intelligent, but empathetic. It's humbling to consider that long before humans walked upright, or crafted tools, or built fire, the essential architecture of our minds, our curiosity, our memory, our ability to form deep bonds, was already under construction in the forests of Africa and Asia. Long before language, there was gesture. Long before writing, there was imitation. And long before civilization, there was community. So tonight, as the light dims and the world grows quiet, imagine those ancient forests, the filtered sunlight, the creaking of branches, the soft calls of animals hidden in the canopy. Somewhere in that world, a primate sits with its group, watching a younger one attempt a difficult climb. It tilts its head, waits, and when the moment comes, it reaches out, not with instinct, but with intention. A helping hand, an offered gesture, something passed down, not just genes, not just traits, but understanding. By the time the Miocene epoch unfolded, about 23 million years ago, the forests of Earth were humming with life. Trees towered and tangled into thick, interwoven canopies. Beneath their shade, light scattered like secrets across the forest floor. And among the branches, something profound was taking root. Not in the soil, but in the minds of creatures who looked more and more like us with every passing generation. This wasn't the age of humans, not yet, but it was something close. It was the time of apes, large-bodied, long-limbed primates who navigated the trees with thought and strength, who built complex relationships, who began slowly to understand the power of memory and connection. Monkeys had already diversified by this point, swinging, leaping, running through both old-world forests and the newly evolving jungles of South America. They were agile and fast, social and vocal, already showing many of the behaviours we associate with intelligence. But the apes, the hominoids, were different. They were heavier, slower, and in some ways more contemplative. Their evolution took a different turn, one that would lead eventually to hominins and to us. Among these ancient apes were creatures like Proconsul, one of the earliest known ape-like primates, living in East Africa some 20 million years ago. Proconsul didn't look quite like a chimpanzee or a gorilla. It was something in between, part monkey, part something more. It had flexible limbs, a larger brain, and no tail. Its teeth and skull suggest a varied diet, and possibly an early form of social life. It spent much of its time in the trees, but may have occasionally ventured onto the ground. As these early apes diversified, their brains continued to grow, not explosively, but steadily. Larger brains allowed for more complex behaviour, not just solving problems in the moment, but remembering past solutions, anticipating future challenges, and understanding the emotional states of others. In group living, this meant better cooperation, more trust, and even the first hints of morality. This brain growth didn't come without cost. Brains are expensive, in energy, in time, in vulnerability. To support a larger brain, you need more food, and often more specific types of food. Fruits rich in sugar, protein from insects or small prey, and later, more complex diets involving digging, cracking, and perhaps even scavenging. Bigger brains also meant longer development, and so childhoods began to stretch. Infants needed more care, more time to learn. And with that came stronger parental bonds, tighter communities, and a growing culture of learning by watching, mimicking, and eventually teaching. Apes, perhaps for the first time in the history of life on Earth, didn't just respond to their environment, they responded to each other. A young ape observing how a mother opened a fruit, a sibling watching another navigate a difficult branch, an elder remembering which path led safely through the forest, or which tree bore the best food in late season. These weren't just instincts, they were experiences, shared and repeated across time. Communication too began to shift. Most animals communicate through calls, scents, gestures, but among primates, and especially apes, this became something more layered. Facial expressions, subtle changes in posture, vocalizations with different meanings depending on context and tone. It wasn't yet language, but it was complex, flexible, and socially meaningful. A grunt could be warning, comfort, or curiosity. A look could carry trust or caution. And within these behaviours, something even more powerful began to emerge. Emotion. Not just reaction, but reflection. Joy in play, grief in loss, comfort in grooming. Apes today mourn their dead, sometimes carrying the bodies of infants or remaining near the place of a group member's death. They reconcile after conflict. They form bonds that last for years, even lifetimes. And while we cannot know the full emotional lives of extinct species, the continuity we see between modern apes and their ancient relatives suggests that these capacities were growing long before humans arrived. Among these developments, we see the seeds of what we call culture. Not just behaviour passed down through instinct, but through observation and imitation. A group of chimpanzees in one forest may crack nuts with stones, while another, genetically identical group across the river does not. Gorillas in one region may use sticks to measure water depth before wading. These aren't genetically hardwired behaviours. They're learned, they're remembered, they're shared. As this capacity grew, so too did the foundation for everything that would one day make us human. Tool use, symbolic thought, abstract understanding, all of it resting quietly in the minds of animals who lived and died without knowing what they were beginning. By the end of the Miocene, apes were spread across Africa, Europe, and Asia. Some walked more upright. Some developed stronger arms for brachiation, swinging through trees. Some stayed small and forest-bound. Others began to explore more open habitats. The exact line from those early apes to humans is complex and still being uncovered. But what matters here is not the names or dates. It is the feeling of continuity, of a thread being slowly pulled through time, winding through forests and savannas, connecting each hand to the next. You are not a sudden miracle. You are the latest bloom on a tree that has been growing for tens of millions of years. Every thought you think, every gesture you make, every memory you carry, it all began in some distant form with those first primates grasping fruit and watching the world with thoughtful eyes. So tonight, as you rest, imagine them, not as distant ancestors, but as quiet beginnings. They did not know what they were becoming, they simply lived, and in living, they carried forward the light that would one day become you. As the forest thickened and climates warmed in the early Cenozoic, a quiet but monumental transformation began to unfold. Life, once scaled to the size of a burrowing rodent or a leaping primate, began to stretch again, this time in flesh, bone, and sheer mass. It was not the sudden return of thunderous dinosaurs, but something more measured, more mammalian. Step by slow step, some creatures grew to fill the largest spaces left behind by extinction, and thus began the second great age of giants. This time not scaled in scales, but in fur, muscle, and a different kind of intelligence. The Eocene epoch beginning around 56 million years ago, offered a world brimming with possibility. Earth's climate was warm and humid, with lush forests stretching across much of the land, even near the poles. In this verdant backdrop, mammalian lineages began to explore what it meant to be big. Really big. Take, for instance, the early relatives of elephants. They didn't begin as towering tusked titans. The earliest known proboscideans, such as Moeritherium, were no larger than a pig. Short-legged, round-bodied and semi-aquatic, they probably spent much of their time wading through swamps and marshes, feeding on soft vegetation. They had no long trunks, no great tusks, just the beginnings of traits that would, in time, become iconic. But evolution favours opportunity, and as forests gave way in some places to more open wetlands and woodlands, size began to offer new advantages. Larger animals could reach higher foliage, they could store more fat and water, they could walk farther between food sources, and, perhaps most importantly, they were harder to kill. In ecosystems where predators had not yet matched their size, growing large was like becoming your own fortress, and so body plans swelled. In Asia, the giant rhino Parasatherium, also known as the Indricothere, emerged as one of the largest land mammals to ever walk the earth. Standing perhaps 5 metres at the shoulder and stretching over 7 metres in length, it resembled a hornless rhino mixed with a long-necked horse. It was not fast. It did not need to be. Few creatures dared to challenge such bulk. It browsed treetops with little fear, the ground shaking softly beneath each step. Elsewhere, another lineage took a very different form, the ground sloths. Long before the slow-moving tree-dwellers we know today, there were their gigantic ancestors. Megatherium, which lived much later in South America, could grow to the size of a modern elephant. It walked on all fours but could rear up on its hind legs to strip trees of leaves. With claws longer than your hand, it was a formidable presence, despite its herbivorous diet. Fossils show wear patterns on its bones that suggest it may have occasionally used those claws in defence, or even to dig, for roots and tubers. The return of gigantism was not limited to land. In the oceans, another quiet revolution was underway. Early whales, descended from land-dwelling hoofed mammals, were beginning their journey into full aquatic life. Creatures like Basilosaurus, with their elongated bodies and serpentine movements, hint at a world where the size ceiling had been lifted in the water too. Though this story would unfold in fuller detail in later epochs, the foundations were already forming. But what made this age of giants different from the dinosaurs that came before? In many ways, it was a matter of biology. These new giants were warm-blooded, furred, and often social. They didn't lay eggs. They nurtured their young. Their behaviours were shaped not just by instinct, but by memory, by family structures, by subtle interactions. A herd of ancient rhinos or early elephants wasn't just a collection of bodies. It was a network of relationships, of migrations, of care passed from mother to calf. The world they inhabited had changed too. Gone were the vast supercontinents of the Mesozoic. The land masses were separating into more familiar forms. Climate zones had become more distinct. Vegetation had shifted from dense cycads and conifers to angiosperms, flowering plants, grasses, shrubs. The earth had become more seasonal, more varied, and the creatures living upon it more finely tuned to its rhythms. Gigantism, while impressive, always walks a fragile line. Large bodies need more food, more space, more time to grow. They are less adaptable in times of sudden change. But in stable environments, warm, open, and rich with vegetation, they thrive. And for millions of years the world offered just such a stage. Even so, size was not an answer in itself. These giants were not dominating the world by force. They were participating in its quiet balance. Their movements shaped forests. Their dung spread seeds. Their bodies, when they died, became meals for countless others. The web of life, interconnected, interdependent, wove itself tighter as the giants walked. And so, This new age of behemoths did not crash into existence with fire and thunder. It unfolded gently, like a breeze over tall grass, one generation a little larger than the last. One branch stretched just a bit higher, one footstep deeper than those before. As you lie still and let your breath slow, picture that world, soft and green, humming with life. A gentle giant wades through a shallow lake. Trees lean into sunlight. The earth, in its vastness, holds them all, and the silence is not empty. It is full of stories. If the age of behemoths was about size, about becoming large enough to reach, to roam, to withstand, then the next chapter in Earth's story was about movement. The quiet stretching of plains, the subtle spread of grasses, and the long, low wind that whispered over vast open landscapes. All of these changes shaped the bodies and behaviours of mammals in ways that were less about towering mass and more about graceful speed, endless travel, and the refinement of form through motion. It began, as most evolutionary transformations do, with a plant. Grasses are ancient, but their rise to dominance didn't occur until the later Cenozoic, particularly during the Oligocene and Miocene epochs, as climates became drier and more seasonal. Trees retreated in many regions, making space for sprawling grasslands, savannas, steppes, and prairies. These environments were not like the lush, shadowed forests of the past. They were open, sunlit, and exposed. In such spaces there were fewer places to hide, but more room to run. And in this new, open world, running became a survival strategy. Among the mammals that first responded to this shift were the ancestors of modern horses, but they didn't begin as the sleek, galloping animals we know today. Early equids, such as Hyracotherium, were small, forest-dwelling creatures about the size of a fox. They had multiple toes and browsed on soft leaves, but as forests gave way to grasslands, these animals began to change. Their limbs grew longer, their toes began to reduce in number, eventually leaving a single strong hoof. Their spines straightened, their necks extended, and their stride lengthened. More importantly, their teeth changed. Grasses are tough, not just in texture, but in chemistry. They contain silica, a mineral that wears down teeth like sandpaper. To graze effectively, mammals needed molars that could endure a lifetime of grinding. And so, through millions of years, their teeth grew taller, with deeper roots and complex ridges for slicing fibrous blades. This shift toward high-crowned, ever-growing molars became one of the most significant adaptations in herbivore evolution. Horses were not alone in this transformation. Across the world, other grazing mammals emerged. Antelopes with slender legs and watchful eyes, deer with branching antlers used in seasonal competition, camels with padded feet for crossing dry steppes, and cattle-like animals that travelled in herds, feeding as they moved. The plains filled with motion, hooves stirred dust, herds shimmered on the horizon. This rise of grazers changed not only the bodies of mammals, but their behaviour. In open grasslands, living alone is risky. There are no trees to climb, no dense underbrush to vanish into. Safety came from numbers. Group living allowed for shared vigilance. One animal could graze while another kept watch. Alarm calls spread quickly. Movement was coordinated. Migration became a rhythm, tied to the rains, to the seasons, to the pulse of the earth. And so social structures evolved alongside physical adaptations. Many grazing mammals began to live in complex groups. Hierarchies emerged. Dominance displays and mating rituals became part of life on the move. Mothers taught calves to walk within hours. The bond between parent and young had to be strong but flexible. There was little time to linger. This wasn't a world of comfort. It was a world of endurance. The spread of grasslands also transformed the land itself. Grazing animals shaped plant communities by eating selectively and trampling undergrowth. Their droppings fertilized the soil. Their migrations spread seeds. In some places, Even fire patterns changed. Dry grass could burn easily, and lightning strikes could ignite sweeping blazes that reset the landscape and encouraged new growth. Herbivores learned to sense these cycles, following fresh shoots after the fire, returning again and again to the places where life was most abundant. There's a quiet elegance in how the body meets the land, in a long-legged horse trotting across a golden field, in a gazelle's leap lifted not just by muscle, but by the memory of predators, in the crunch of grass between teeth shaped by time. This is evolution not as conquest, but as choreography, a dance between need and possibility. And it wasn't just about eating. The rise of the grassland shaped predators too, and we'll return to that soon. But even before tooth met tooth, the plains were already shaping the rules of the game. The hunted had become faster, more vigilant, more social, and the world in turn had become more intricate. For all their speed, these grazers carried the past within them. Their teeth, bones, and muscles remembered forests. Their genes held shadows of older shapes. But they had changed, adapted to a world that no longer waited in one place. And perhaps, as you rest now, you can picture them, a horizon lined with silhouettes, a herd at dusk moving gently, not in fear but in rhythm, the earth warm beneath their hooves, the grass bending in waves, the sky vast and quiet above it all. Evolution doesn't always shout. Sometimes it gallops. Every grazer, every galloper, every silent herbivore that moved across the ancient plains carried with it not just the whisper of wind in tall grass, but the attention of something else, something watching, something waiting. For all the elegance and endurance of prey animals, ecosystems do not build themselves on speed alone. The balance of life depends not just on those who eat the leaves, but on those who wait in shadow, those who follow in silence, those whose very presence keeps the rest alert. And so, as the world of grasslands and open spaces matured, a new generation of predators emerged, different in form from the dinosaurs that came before, but no less efficient. In the same way that grazers adapted to openness with speed, eyesight, and group living, predators responded in kind. Some became specialists in ambush, others in endurance. Some evolved massive teeth and powerful jaws. Others relied on teamwork, patience, or an unsettling combination of both. But all of them, in their own way, were shaped by the prey they pursued. Among the most iconic were the saber-toothed cats. Unlike modern big cats, whose long, conical teeth are built for gripping and crushing, saber-toothed species like Smilodon evolved upper canines that were flat, curved, and serrated, almost like knives. These enormous teeth could reach over 7 inches in length, capable of delivering deep, slashing bites to vulnerable areas. But they came with trade-offs. Saber teeth were fragile, prone to breaking if used improperly, and required precise technique. This suggests that saber-toothed cats were ambush predators, relying on stealth and power to bring down large prey quickly, rather than chasing them across long distances. Their build supports this idea. Smilodon, for example, had short, muscular limbs, a barrel-shaped chest, and incredibly powerful forearms. It likely used these to wrestle prey to the ground before delivering a killing bite, more wrestler than sprinter, more lion than cheetah. Fossils of these cats have been found in tar pits and ancient hunting grounds, often alongside the bones of mammoths, horses, and bison. It was a dangerous world, and every successful hunt came with risk. But mammals weren't the only predators reshaping the food web. In South America and parts of North America, another lineage rose to terrifying prominence: the terror birds. Flightless but fast, some species of these avian hunters stood over 3 meters tall. They had beaks like pickaxes, long legs built for pursuit, and keen eyesight. These were not passive grazers of seeds. They were active predators, likely capable of chasing down small mammals and birds with bursts of startling speed. In a world without large predatory mammals, at least for a while, birds stepped in to fill the role, proving once again that evolution does not care about tradition. It only cares about what works. Alongside these apex predators, other carnivores were undergoing their own split, one that would echo across the Cenozoic and into our present day. This split occurred between two broad lineages, the caniforms and the feliforms. Caniforms, the dog-like carnivores, include not only dogs and wolves, but also bears, seals, raccoons, and more. These animals tend to be more omnivorous, more generalist in diet and behaviour, and often more social. Early caniforms like amphicyonids, sometimes called bear dogs, blurred the lines between familiar forms. They were large, robust and flexible, able to hunt or scavenge depending on the opportunity. Feliforms, the cat-like carnivores, include cats, hyenas, mongooses, and others. These animals evolved towards specialization, sharp claws, acute night vision, stealthy movement. They often relied on solitary hunting and precise technique rather than group strategies. Each approach came with strengths and limitations, and both found success in different parts of the world. What makes this divergence important isn't just taxonomy, it's ecology. Different hunting styles support different types of prey, and vice versa. The rise of herds encouraged the rise of coordinated hunters. The spread of small mammals gave rise to agile stalkers. The food web adjusted itself over and over again, responding to climate shifts, extinction events, and migrations. And not every role was glamorous. For every apex predator, there were dozens of scavengers, creatures who made a living not by killing, but by waiting. Vultures soared overhead, using thermals to search for carcasses from miles away. Early hyenas cracked bones for the marrow inside. Rodents picked clean what others left behind. Even insects, worms and fungi took part in the cycle. In a functioning ecosystem, nothing goes to waste. There were burrowers too, mammals that dug deep into the earth, avoiding both predator and prey, living lives in darkness. Some were insectivores, others herbivores. Their tunnels aerated the soil. Their droppings fertilized it. They were unseen but essential. A reminder that power in nature is not always visible. And as the food web grew more complex, the balance became more delicate. Every change in population rippled outward. A drop in prey numbers could mean famine for predators. A boom in grasses could shift herbivore migrations. Fire, drought, volcanic eruptions, all could reset the system in ways no animal could predict. Yet for millions of years this balance held. It didn't always look stable. Predators fought, prey ran, populations rose and fell. But beneath the surface chaos was something deeper. An unspoken equilibrium, maintained by instinct, shaped by adaptation, and refined by time. So tonight, let your thoughts drift to that hidden world, to the great cats crouched in tall grass, to birds that ran instead of flew, to wolves that walked on bear-like paws. The earth was alive with tension and grace, a quiet drama without dialogue, where every movement mattered and every role had its place. Balance is not stillness, it is motion in harmony. Beneath your feet the ground may feel still. The floor beneath your bed doesn't shift. The sidewalks don't drift. And yet the very surface of earth, its skin of stone and soil, is always in motion. Not fast, not loud, but persistent, powerful, and utterly transformative. Over millions of years the continents glide like ancient ships, pushed and pulled by deep forces beneath the crust. And wherever they move, life must respond. This slow-motion rearrangement of the planet's geography is called plate tectonics. Earth's outer shell is broken into a dozen or so major plates, which float on the semi-molten rock of the mantle. They collide, pull apart, slide past one another. Sometimes they rise up and create mountains. Sometimes they sink and form ocean trenches. These movements have shaped everything, from the shape of our oceans to the course of evolution itself. In the early Cenozoic, as mammals and birds were rising, the continents were still not in their present configuration. South America was an island, continent, isolated from North America. Africa had not yet fully docked with Eurasia. Australia was drifting away from Antarctica, its unique fauna carried like passengers on a solitary raft. India was speeding northward, on a collision course with Asia. When it finally arrived, it buckled the crust upward and formed the Himalayas, a mountain range still rising today. These shifts did more than create dramatic landscapes. They reshaped climates. The closing of ocean passages altered currents, and with them, the distribution of heat around the globe. Rainfall patterns changed, deserts formed, glaciers spread, and as land masses drifted into new latitudes, ecosystems followed, or vanished. Migration became a test of timing and terrain. Sometimes land bridges formed, brief corridors of connection. The Bering Land Bridge, for instance, once linked Siberia and Alaska, allowing animals like mammoths, camels and humans to move between Asia and the Americas. Other times, continents remained isolated, and life evolved in its own quiet corner. Australia is a striking example. Cut off early, it became a laboratory of marsupials. With no placental mammals to compete with, creatures like kangaroos, wombats, and Tasmanian devils diversified into every available niche. South America followed a similar path, harbouring giant flightless birds and unique mammals like the glyptodont, an armoured herbivore the size of a car. When North and South America eventually joined at the Isthmus of Panama about 3 million years ago, the results were dramatic. Northern predators invaded the south. Southern species moved north. It was called the Great American Biotic Interchange, and many native South American species did not survive the competition. But others, like opossums and armadillos, made their mark and remain to this day. The shaping of land also shaped isolation. Madagascar, long separated from Africa, became home to lemurs, primates that exist nowhere else. Their isolation allowed them to flourish, free from monkeys and apes. Their story is not one of conquest, but of continuity, unchallenged and quietly evolving. Each movement of the earth wrote a new chapter in life's story, not by command, but by condition. A mountain range rising in the middle of a continent divides populations. Over generations, those once connected creatures begin to diverge, adapting to different climates, different foods, different threats. One becomes two become four. Isolation breeds difference, and difference breeds diversity. But it wasn't always about separation. Sometimes collision brought convergence. In Eurasia, the meeting of African and Asian species created rich hybrid ecosystems. Elephants and rhinoceroses roaming alongside camels, lions, and early humans. These places of mingling, where different lineages met, sparked both competition and innovation. The movement of continents also influenced extinction. When a sea closes or a mountain rises, it can dry out, a once fertile basin or trap warm air that alters local climates. If species can't adapt quickly, they vanish. Others take their place. It is not a process of fairness, but of fit. All of this, every migration, every adaptation, every extinction, was shaped by geology. And yet, for the creatures living through it, there was no map, no warning. A cooling climate arrived as a bitter wind. A disappearing land bridge became a lost path, and a rising mountain was simply a horizon that grew more distant each season. And so, as you rest tonight, consider the quiet strength of the earth beneath you. Not just a stage for life, but an actor in its own right, rearranging its continents, sculpting its valleys, opening doors and closing them again. You do not feel it move, but it does, slowly, certainly. and with every inch it carries the future of life along with it. The Earth does not sit quietly in one climate, one season, one mood. It breathes in long, slow rhythms, warming, cooling, shifting, pausing. Over millions of years, these swings in temperature and atmosphere have rewritten the map of life more thoroughly than any single predator or prey. And though we often imagine evolution as a gradual, steady climb, it is often in the pressure of extremes, in the flickering heat of abrupt warming, or the long hush of glacial cold, that life makes its biggest leaps. One such moment came about 56 million years ago in an event known as the Paleocene-Eocene Thermal Maximum, or PTM. It began with a sudden spike in global temperatures, 5 to 8 degrees Celsius, caused by a massive release of carbon into the atmosphere. The source of this carbon is still debated. It may have come from volcanic activity, the release of methane from ocean sediments, or the combustion of ancient peat. Whatever the cause, the effect was dramatic. Oceans warmed, polar ice melted, and tropical conditions pushed toward the poles. Sea levels rose, habitats shifted. For plants and animals, this meant an urgent choice: move, adapt, or vanish. In the oceans, acidification disrupted the balance of life. Many deep-sea organisms, especially those with calcium carbonate shells, struggled to survive. On land, forests changed character. Some species of mammals, small, quick-breeding and flexible in diet, took advantage of the warm burst to expand into new territories. Others were squeezed out, unable to keep pace with the changing conditions. One of the most intriguing effects of the PTM was the dispersal of primates. During this warming phase, early primates migrated across northern continents, reaching parts of Europe and North America that had previously been too cold. Fossils of Talardina, a tiny primate no bigger than a mouse, have been found across Eurasia and North America. They travelled not in large migrations, but generation by generation, following the trees that followed the warmth. This episode reminds us that climate is not just background, it is a force, gentle or sudden, that shapes every breath, every leaf, every lineage. It has no intention, but it has immense power. And the PTM was not the only such moment. Throughout the Cenozoic, Earth's climate wobbled and lurched. Periods of warmth were followed by long stretches of cooling. The Miocene epoch, around 15 million years ago, began warm but grew cooler and drier. Grasslands spread, forests retreated. New evolutionary pressures emerged. By the time the Pleistocene arrived, about 2.6 million years ago, the planet had entered a full glacial rhythm, alternating between long ice ages and short interglacial periods. These cycles did more than chill the air. They redrew coastlines. Ice sheets locked up massive volumes of water, lowering sea levels and exposing new land bridges. Then, as the ice retreated, seas returned, isolating species that had once shared the same terrain. Lakes appeared and vanished. Deserts expanded and contracted, and at each stage life had to respond. For some species the pressure was too great. Entire groups disappeared, unable to adapt, unable to migrate, unable to wait. But others rose to meet the challenge. Mammoths grew thick coats and long tusks to dig through snow. Saber-toothed cats developed powerful bodies for tackling large prey in open tundra. Humans too would eventually be shaped by these changing conditions, forced to innovate, cooperate, and imagine futures beyond the cold. In times of relative stability, evolution strolls. In times of climate upheaval, it runs. There's a term biologists use for this: punctuated equilibrium. It suggests that species often remain relatively unchanged for long periods, only to undergo rapid bursts of change when environments shift dramatically. These bursts aren't always visible in the fossil record, but their effects ripple through ecosystems. A sudden drop in temperature might cause one food source to vanish. That forces an herbivore to find something new, which in turn pressures predators to adapt their hunting strategies. One change leads to another. and the web of life rewrites itself. It's a process that doesn't favour the strongest, but the most responsive. Flexibility, more than size, strength or speed, becomes the key to survival. The ability to eat a slightly different leaf, to walk a little farther, to breed a little earlier. These small shifts repeated over generations become the difference between extinction and endurance. And so, while climate change brings hardship, it also brings opportunity. The flowering of grasses, the rise of grazers, the spread of apes, the emergence of human ancestors, all were, in part, responses to changing climates. Heat and cold are not simply environmental conditions, they are the invisible hands that sculpt biology. Even today, every living thing carries the echoes of ancient climate shifts. The shape of your lungs, the way your blood regulates heat, the distribution of fat and hair on your body, these are not random. They are the memory of ice and fire, of drought and flood written into flesh. As you lie still, let your breath mirror the Earth's own rhythm. Inhale as warmth, exhale as cool. Imagine a planet not frozen in time, but always turning, always shifting. And remember that every storm, every season, every forgotten wind was, in its own way, a lesson. And life, quiet, persistent, astonishing life, has always been listening. It's easy to think of extinction as an end, a full stop, a curtain closing on a story that will never be told again. And in a way, that's true. Each species lost takes with it a universe of behaviours, adaptations, and quiet rhythms that will never return. But in the long, slow arc of Earth's history, extinction is not just an ending. It is also a clearing, a silence before the next song begins. This strange paradox, that destruction creates space for creation, has shaped the course of life again and again. The most dramatic examples are the 5 major mass extinctions, scattered like punctuation across deep time. Each one rewrote the rules of the biosphere. Each one pulled the curtain down on one act and opened it for another. Perhaps the most famous of these moments is the one we began this story with, the end Cretaceous extinction 66 million years ago. A rock from space, roughly the size of a small city, struck what is now the Yucatan Peninsula. In an instant, the age of the dinosaurs was dealt a mortal blow. The shockwave, the firestorms, the long winter that followed, all contributed to the collapse of ecosystems across the planet. 3/4 of all species vanished, including every land-dwelling dinosaur that wasn't a bird. And yet, without that asteroid, there might be no you, no language, no music, no memory, no questions whispered into the night. Because that emptiness, terrifying as it must have been, was also opportunity. With the dinosaurs gone, ecological niches stood vacant. Forests regrew, insects returned, and small mammals, long overshadowed and forced into nighttime survival strategies, began to emerge. Some burrowed, some climbed, some learned to glide, to swim, to sprint. Over time, they diversified into the forms we know today: horses and whales, elephants and primates, bats and bears. Without that moment of destruction, it's unlikely that mammals would have ever risen to dominate the land. The rules had changed, and evolution, never sentimental, played by the new ones. But this pattern isn't unique to the dinosaurs. The end Permian extinction, over 250 million years ago, was even more severe. Triggered by massive volcanic activity in Siberia, it unleashed a chain reaction of global warming, ocean acidification, and oxygen depletion. An estimated 90% of all marine species disappeared, along with 70% of those on land. For a while, Earth was almost silent, but not forever. From that silence, new lineages emerged. The ancestors of modern reptiles, the first archosaurs, who would one day become both crocodiles and dinosaurs. Even the earliest mammals traced their roots through that dark corridor of time. Other extinctions too played their roles. The end Triassic cleared the way for dinosaurs to rise. The end Ordovician opened up new space in the oceans. The end Devonian shaped the course of fish and amphibian evolution. Each of these events was a wound, and each one left a scar that became the foundation for something unexpected. There's a quiet lesson in all of this. Not that catastrophe is good, but that life is persistent, that evolution is not a ladder, but a branching, tangled, shifting path, sometimes cut short, sometimes redirected, always moving forward, even through loss. And it is not only the dramatic ends that matter. Sometimes it's the near misses, the brushes with extinction that leave only a few survivors behind, a narrow genetic bottleneck, a moment when everything might have been lost but wasn't. These too create the conditions for innovation. When populations are small, evolution moves faster. Mutations have a greater effect. New traits can spread quickly. Risks are taken, not consciously of course, but by the random shuffling of DNA, tested against an unfamiliar world. In the aftermath of extinction, the survivors are not the best, but the luckiest. And from their descendants, new wonders unfold. Even flowering plants, so dominant today, rose after one such crisis. Their seeds, enclosed in protective fruit, allowed for more targeted dispersal. Their flowers attracted pollinators, encouraging cooperation between plant and insect. These small efficiencies reshaped ecosystems from the roots up, and they thrived in the post-extinction world, carpeting the earth with green and scent and bloom. The same in time would happen with primates. The early tree dwellers that survived the KP extinction eventually gave rise to monkeys, apes, and, after many millions of years, humans. We are not inevitable. We are improbable, a consequence of absence as much as presence. We live in the gap left behind by others. That may sound unsettling, but it's also strangely comforting. Because it means that change is natural, that endings are not always failures, that resilience is not about avoiding loss, but about responding to it, quietly, patiently, and sometimes with surprising creativity. So tonight, as you let your mind soften and drift, imagine Earth as a vast, breathing story. Pages torn, pages rewritten, but never abandoned. Even in darkness something begins. A seed takes root, a feather grows, a footstep presses softly into soil no one has yet named. Some echoes don't fade. They change shape. They lift from the ground and vanish into sky. And so it is with the last dinosaurs. Not the ones with teeth like scythes or necks that reached for the sun, but the ones who traded mass for motion, scales for feathers, and earthbound limbs for wings. When the world darkened and fire swept the forests, when the air turned cold and food vanished, most of the dinosaurs fell silent. But a few did not. They shrank, survived, and eventually sang. Birds. It may be surprising to learn that birds are not just descended from dinosaurs, they are dinosaurs, not metaphorically, not symbolically, but genetically, anatomically, evolutionarily. They are the last living lineage of a vast vanished dynasty. Their ancestors were small, feathered theropods, bipedal, sharp-eyed, fast. Some of them already had wings, some had hollow bones, some had feathers not for flight but for warmth, for display, or perhaps even for gliding. Flight didn't arrive all at once. It was pieced together, step by step, feather by feather. One of the most famous fossils bridging the gap between bird and dinosaur is Archaeopteryx. Discovered in the 19th century in Germany, its preserved skeleton shows an animal in transition. It had the teeth of a reptile, the claws of a predator, and a long bony tail. But it also had flight feathers, long asymmetrical veins designed for cutting through the air. Whether Archaeopteryx truly flew or merely glided is still debated, but what matters more is what it represents, the continuity of change, a snapshot of flight in the making. As more fossils have been found, particularly in China's rich feathered dinosaur deposits. We've learned that feathers were surprisingly common among theropods. Not all of them flew. Some likely used feathers for thermoregulation, much like modern penguin chicks. Others flashed them in mating displays as peacocks do today, and some began to refine them into tools of lift and thrust. But when the asteroid struck, flight wasn't enough on its own. Most feathered dinosaurs still perished. So why did birds survive? Size was part of it. Many early birds were small, which meant they needed less food and could shelter more easily. Nesting behaviours mattered too. Some could have laid eggs in burrows or protected areas, away from the fallout. A flexible diet helped, allowing them to eat seeds, insects, and whatever else was left when the world's ecosystems collapsed. Perhaps even more crucial was mobility. Birds could escape local disaster zones more readily. They could follow the light as it returned, seek out patches of surviving vegetation, and travel to find food. And when the dust settled and the air began to clear, they remained. Alone among their kin, they perched on broken branches, cleaned their feathers, and began again. The idea that birds are dinosaurs reframes how we see the world. That pigeon on the sidewalk, a distant cousin of Velociraptor. The sparrow in your garden, a living fossil carrying in its bones the story of the Jurassic and Cretaceous. The very act of flight, a swallow darting through twilight, a hawk circling on a thermal, is not just beautiful. It is ancient. It is survival written in air. We often divide nature into clean categories: reptile, bird, mammal. But evolution resists neatness. It blurs. It overlaps. Birds are not just birds. They are the thinned down, refined edge of an entire era. They remind us that the past never truly disappears. It adapts. It becomes lighter. It learns to sing. In their feathers we see the memory of scales. In their feet the echo of claws. In their eggs the ancient ritual of reptiles. And in their calls, the chirps, whistles and haunting cries, we hear the voice of a lineage that refused to vanish. So next time you see a bird pausing on a wire, swooping across a winter sky, darting between branches, try to imagine not just what it is, but what it was. A survivor, a descendant, a thread of life stretched taut through catastrophe. And imagine what it means to share the world with them. Not just because they are beautiful, though they are. Not just because they pollinate flowers, eat pests, or migrate thousands of miles, but because they are proof that life can change drastically and still endure. Proof that the smallest creatures can carry forward the grandest histories, that flight can be rebirth. You might not feel connected to dinosaurs when you're making breakfast, watching crows pick through crumbs, or hearing the faint hoot of an owl just before dawn. But the connection is there, quietly perched on a branch outside your window. Feathers aren't magic, but what they represent is, and if you let yourself, you can follow that feathered memory, not into the sky, but into stillness, into the soft rustling of a wing, the warmth of a downy chest, the hush that follows when the day ends and the roost settles and flight gives way to sleep. When you picture the sky, what do you see? Maybe it's the pale blue of late morning, or the lavender hush just before dusk. But in nearly every part of the world, from tropical forests to frozen coasts, the sky is not empty. It's stitched with wings, gliding, beating, darting, coasting. Birds have taken the sky and made it a map of their diversity. They are not just remnants of ancient dinosaurs. They are the heirs of wind, the architects of flight, and the composers of a world made musical. After the dust of the end Cretaceous extinction settled, the birds that survived began to radiate outward, to explore, adapt, and specialize. They found the forests first, clinging to branches and picking through the underbrush, then the coastlines, with tidal pools and windswept cliffs, then the skies, open and vast. And they did not do so with one form, but with many. Today, there are over 10,000 known species of birds. That's more than mammals and amphibians combined. The range of their shapes, behaviours, songs and survival strategies is astounding. Some became masters of delicacy. The hummingbird, no bigger than your thumb, flaps its wings 50 to 80 times per second. It can hover, fly backward, and feed from flowers with a beak, shaped like a straw. Its heart beats over 1,000 times a minute. A life lived in fast forward, tuned to the frequency of nectar and movement. Others became giants. The ostrich, grounded but graceful, can reach up to 9 feet tall. Though it cannot fly, it can sprint faster than most predators, over 40 miles per hour, with legs built like coiled springs. Evolution reminded us here that flight is not the only measure of avian success. Sometimes, the wings are for balance, not lift. Between these extremes lie countless variations. Eagles soaring on thermal currents, barely flapping as they scan the land below. Swifts that sleep while gliding through the air, spending months aloft without touching the ground. Puffins that flap furiously through water, chasing fish with wings repurposed as fins. Then there are the songbirds, the ones that fill the mornings and evenings with sound. Songbirds don't just chirp randomly, they compose. Their vocalizations are used to defend territory, to attract mates, to call family members, and sometimes, it seems, just to practice the art of beauty. A nightingale may have hundreds of distinct notes in its repertoire. Some birds learn regional dialects. Some even mimic the calls of other species, or the sounds of machines, car alarms, or human voices. Birdsong is not merely instinctual. It's learned, memorized, rehearsed. A young bird listens to its parents and neighbours. It practices, it adjusts, it perfects. This learning window is short but formative, like a child absorbing language, and once learned, a bird's song becomes its signature. Flight, too, takes learning. Young birds must practice balance, timing, wing strength. First they hop, then they flutter, then they leap. The moment of first flight, awkward, brief, and often clumsy, is one of evolution's recurring triumphs. Some birds live in one place their whole lives. Others embark on migrations that span continents. The Arctic tern travels from the top of the world to the bottom and back again each year, over 44,000 miles. That's almost 2 round trips around the planet. No GPS, no map, just instinct, magnetic fields, the position of the sun, and a memory passed down through generations. And as they move, they carry seeds in their feathers. They eat insects from crops. They disperse pollen. They clean bones. They knit ecosystems together through movement and presence. In this way, birds are not only survivors, they are connectors. Their bones are hollow but strong. Their beaks have evolved into chisels, straws, hooks, and sieves. Their feet grip branches or paddle through water. Every part of their body has been refined, shaped not for any one purpose, but for 10,000 different ones. This is evolution not as repetition, but as variation on a theme. And still, despite all this, birds remain mysterious. How does a pigeon find its way home across an unfamiliar city? How does a crow recognize a face and remember a grudge? Why do starlings murmurate, swirling in tight acrobatic flocks, painting the sky with motion too complex for a single mind to guide? We don't always know, and that's part of the wonder. Birds remind us that ancient things can be modern, that the present is filled with echoes of the past, that a feather floating on the breeze might carry the memory of a clawed foot, of a forest long gone, of an egg warmed in volcanic ash. And they also remind us that lightness matters, not just in body, but in being. That to survive isn't always to fight or endure or resist. Sometimes it's to lift, to adapt, to let go of the ground and try something new. As you listen, perhaps to the soft chirp outside your window or the distant call of an unseen gull, remember that you share this world not only with history but with its flight. Every wing beat is a whisper of survival, every song a lesson in persistence, and every bird in its own way is a teacher in transformation. It's strange to think that your story began in the dark, not metaphorically but literally, in the cool silence beneath ancient ferns, beneath scorched skies, beneath the feet of giants. Your ancestors were not mighty. They did not roar. They did not fly. They did not rule. They hid. They listened. They waited. And somehow, that was enough. The creatures you come from were small, warm-blooded mammals, probably no larger than a modern shrew or mouse. They scurried under roots and into burrows, emerging cautiously to forage. They lived by night, perhaps because the world above was still too dangerous by day. Their hearing was sharp, their bodies were soft and warm, and their lives were often short. But they had something powerful on their side: adaptability. When the asteroid struck, it ended many things. But for these little mammals, it also ended an era of domination. The skies darkened, the forests burned, but underground, in the hidden places, life stirred. Seeds stored in caches, insects that survived the cold, water in crevices, a chance, and they took it. From those fragile beginnings, mammals began to rise, not quickly, not with fanfare, but with persistence. They explored, adapted, diversified. They changed size, shape, diet, behaviour. Some became grazers, some became hunters. Some stayed small, others grew large. Some climbed trees, some returned to the sea, and a few eventually began to think. Among them were primates, creatures who lived in trees and developed grasping hands, sharp eyes, and bigger brains. They needed these tools to navigate branches, judge distances, and remember where the ripe fruit would be. Intelligence was not a goal, but a side effect of a life lived in 3 dimensions. From those primates came apes, from apes came hominins, and from hominins, after a long twisting road filled with extinctions and migrations and quiet perseverance, came humans. You're not separate from this story. You are the continuation of it. Your bones carry the memory of creatures that once scuttled in the dark. Your eyes, still tuned to detect motion in low light, echo the night-bound lives of your ancestors. Your breath, warm and rhythmic, is a gift passed down from lungs that learn to survive in thin, smoky air. You're not just descended from survivors. You are survival, still moving, still wandering, still here. The story of life on Earth is not a ladder. It is not a race. It is not a script written with purpose or end. It is a tree, branching, curling, diverging in infinite directions. Some limbs stop, some twist back, some stretch further than anyone could have guessed. And if you follow your own branch far enough back, past cities and villages, past farming and fire, past stone tools and shelters, you end up not at a throne, but at a burrow, a nest of leaves, a creature curled tightly in the cold, breathing slowly, waiting for the light to return. That is your origin story, not of grandeur, but of endurance, and perhaps there is comfort in that, because the world still shifts, the future still hides, and you, like all the creatures that came before you, are not required to be perfect, only to adapt, to listen, to rest, and to wake again, ready for what comes next. So now, as the day settles behind you and the sky turns its face away, let yourself return to that quiet. You don't need to do anything right now. You don't need to solve or strive. Evolution takes time, so should you. Let your breath slow. Let your thoughts grow soft. Imagine the earth turning beneath you, not with noise or haste, but gently, like a cradle. The stars above, distant cousins of the atoms in your blood, glimmering like old stories. The trees outside, older than memory, humming softly in the wind. You are part of this, not apart from it. You are a mammal, still warm, still curious, still dreaming. Sleep well, small mammal, you've come a long way.